Assalamu alaikum. Now we start with the next topic of the nervous tissue, that is the classification of the nervous tissue. We've already discussed the different types of cells which are present in the nervous tissue. Then we talked about the receptors which get the information from the periphery and then they transfer it to the outside to the central nervous system. And then there are the effectors. We talked about the effectors. Effectors are those which bring the information from the central nervous system or the nervous system to the periphery what is to be done. So that is both. We have talked about that. Now we're going to quickly talk about the classification of the nervous system. The classification of the nervous system is basically divided structurally and functionally. Structurally, if we say it is central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system is basically the nerves and the associated ganglia which are there. That is structurally and functionally. Somatic nervous system, that is which supplies to the muscles, and the autonomic nervous system is which is concerned with the supply to the different viscera. And we can also classify according to the detail, that is the anatomical classification. If the anatomical classification, you have central nervous system which includes the brain and the spinal cord. The brain lies in the cranial cavity and the spinal cord lies in the vertebral canal. Then functionally that you have, that is the somatic nervous system, innervation of the muscles, tendons, joints as well. That is soma is the body wall, that is it's concerned according if you classify it functionally. And then it is the visceral, that is with the relation with the viscera of the body or the organs of the body, and they're involuntary. That is somatic is voluntary and the visceral is involuntary. Then you can classify it embryologically, that is something which is developed from the forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. You can also say prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon, and then the spinal cord, that is how the things, what part of the brain developed from what part. Then there was the neural tube which is formed. This is then divided into three components, that is forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain, and then different structures derived from the different parts of the neural tube. And then there is another system which we label as the enteric nervous system or the mini brain. This is concerned with the, this is present in the walls of the intestinal tract or the respiratory and the heart. And it is said that it controls its motility of these portions itself. So it is called a mini brain. That means it is an automatic in functioning. Then we have the coverings, that is the meninges, that is the three meninges, that is pia mater, arachnoid mater, and dura mater, collectively called the meninges. Then there is the CSF, which is produced by the choroid plexus. In these meninges or in the cavities, it is located between the subarachnoid space between the pia mater and the arachnoid space, and this surrounds and protects and it circulates in the subarachnoid space. The brain is covered intimately immediately by the pia mater. Outside that is the arachnoid mater, and the outermost is the double-layered tough dura mater, which has a meningeal and the endosteal layer. The endosteal layer of the dura mater is in contact with the cranial cavity, and the meningeal layer is indirectly in contact with the brain. Then how do you divide the major divisions of the central and the peripheral nervous system? That is basically the two ways in which we can divide the nervous system. That is something which lies in the midline, that is which contains the brain, that is forebrain, that is midbrain, hindbrain, and the spinal cord, and the different components of all these. Forebrain is includes, develops the cerebrum and the diencephalon, that is the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, all that. Then you have the midbrain, the hindbrain, that is medulla, pons, and cerebellum, and then the different segments of the spinal cord. And in the peripheral nervous system, we include the cranial and the spinal nerves, that is those different nerves that we have. If you see in this portion is your central nervous system, that is the forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain, all what is developing in the spinal cord. And then these nerves that you see in the other diagram, that is the peripheral nervous system. Major divisions in the brain, it lies in the cranial cavity covered by the meninges, the subarachnoid space as the cerebrospinal fluid, and then this brain is divided into three components, that is the mainly or ascending order from the spinal cord, hindbrain, midbrain, and the forebrain. Hindbrain includes the medulla, pons, and the cerebellum. Forebrain is also divided into diencephalon and the cerebrum, and midbrain is the midbrain and the brainstem. Collectively, you call it as medulla, pons, and midbrain. When you collectively use the term brainstem, it means that we're talking about the three levels. So these are the different pictures which show you. Hindbrain is basically conical, connects pons superiorly to the spinal cord. Inferiorly, it is the passage for the ascending and descending fibers. Same is the case with the pons, that is It is inferior to the midbrain, superior to the medulla. It is connecting the two cerebral hemispheres, the tract, and it also contains the ascending and descending tracts. Then we have cerebellum, in lies in the posterior cranial fossa, posterior the pons and medulla. It has two hemispheres connected together by the constricted portion that is called the vermis. The cerebellum is connected to the midbrain by the superior. It has three tracts of fibers: superior cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle, and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Peduncles are nothing but a collective of different nerve fibers which forms the tracts or the columns. The is connected to the midbrain by the superior cerebellar peduncle, by the pons to the middle cerebellar peduncle, and by the medulla to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So these different connected different parts of the brain. It has different, these tracts are there, and then it has the gray nuclei, in which these most of them are small in size, but the largest of these is known as the crumpled bag appearance, that is the dentate nucleus. So you have tracts and the columns. Then you have the midbrain. Midbrain is the narrow part that connects the forebrain to the hindbrain. It has the narrow cavity in between that is called the cerebral aqueduct. This also contains the ascending and the descending pathways. Then is the diencephalon, which is basically the midway between the two cerebral hemispheres, that is thalamus and hypothalamus, epithalamus and metathalamus. That is, it is diencephalon. Then you have the cerebrum, that is the largest part. It has two cerebral hemispheres connected by something white matter, that is the tracts which connect the two hemispheres, which is called the corpus callosum. The cerebrum extends from the frontal to the occipital bone. It is divided into a deep cleft in which lies the falx cerebri. That is the fold of the dura mater. It is covered by, composed of cortex on the outside and thrown into folds separated by fissures or sulci, that is the elevations and depressions which are present in the cortex. That is called the sulci and gyri. And within the hemisphere is a central white matter core that is large, and in that are embedded certain ganglia or collections of nuclei which are called the gray matter, which are called the basal nuclei or the ganglia. In this you have the gray thalamic chordate and the lentiform nuclei. And then the cortex, gray matter outside, white matter on the inside present, and the cavity that is present in the cerebrum is called the two lateral ventricles. See this is the cerebral hemisphere. These are the sulci and the gyri, and then these are the small ones. Then you have the cavity. This is the third ventricle, and in that you have this different parts, and this is the midbrain and the thalami which are there. You'll talk about these when you talk about brain in detail. So I'm just giving you an idea of what are the different collections. Then you have the cavities of the brain. These are called the ventricles. The medulla, the pons, and the cerebellum, they surround a cavity which is called the fourth ventricle. This fourth ventricle superiorly extends into the third ventricle by passing through the middle part of the midbrain. That is the cerebral aqueduct, which is present in the midbrain, and then it enters into the diencephalon, that is between the two cerebral hemispheres. You have the third ventricle, and third ventricle is linked to the two lateral ventricles which lie in the cerebral hemispheres and interventricular foramen. Inferiorly, it is continuous with the central canal of the spinal cord. So, and then again they communicate with the subarachnoid space through three openings in the inferior part of the roof. So these cavities of the brain, in the different parts of the brain, they are connected with each other. In this, you have the lining, which is the pia mater, in double layer pia mater, with the vascularized pia mater that produces the CSF, which floats into it, and this CSF then passes out onto the subarachnoid space, which provides protection. Then is spinal cord. Spinal cord is situated within the vertebral column, surrounded again by the three meninges, same as the brain. It's protection by the CSF, and there spinal cord is cylindrical, begins just beneath the foramen magnum, and it continues with the medulla at that level. It terminates inferiorly where it tapers off at L1 level, lumbar level, which is called the conus medullaris, and below that the pia mater extends down till the tip of the coccyx. That extension of the pia mater is called the filum terminal. Otherwise, at lumbar level, the conus medullaris is the tapering end of the spinal cord. All the length are attached. The 31 pairs of the spinal nerves, they are attached with the anterior and the posterior roots, each of these serous rootlets, and they come out through the corresponding segments of the cord. And then each posterior root gives a ganglia related with it, which drives to the peripheral and the central nerves. The spinal cord is inner core of gray matter, outer is the white matter. Gray matter is an H-shaped pillar combined together with the thin small portion in the center, which is called the commissure, which is the connection, and in the central part of that you have the cavity of the spinal cord that is called the central canal. White matter is outside. It is divided in anterior, lateral and posterior white columns. If you see this picture, this is the white column on the outside, and this H-shaped structure is the gray matter with the central portion where you have the central canal, that is the cavity of the spinal cord, and this contains all the different multipolar neurons of the spinal cord. These are the columns which are the different tracks, that is the white matter. Then is the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system consists of nerve fibers and cell bodies outside the CNS that conduct impulses to or away from the central nervous system. The first is the nerve fibers. What are the different types of nerve fibers? A nerve fiber consists of an axon, basically, which forms, or a nerve which is formed. It is covered by the neurolemma, which is the cell membrane of the Schwann cells, and then you have the outside that is the endoneural connective tissue. This in the peripheral nervous system, the neurolemma forms two classes. That is myelinated fiber, that is the myelination sheet, that is in the peripheral cells. The Schwann cells, they encircle the axon and they produce this lipid type individual axon, and they produce this lipid coating which is called the myelin sheath, and this myelin sheath activates the passage of the impulse. Then there is an unmyelinated nerve fiber which is composed of Schwann cells. Instead of one axon, multiple axons are separately embedded in with this cytoplasm of the Schwann cells. This does not produce myelin, and so these are the unmyelinated. So in the myelinated nerve fibers, one axon is enwrapped by the one Schwann cell, and that produces the myelin, that is the myelinated sheet. And then there are unmyelinated and unmyelinated. One Schwann cell is going to enclose multiple axons, but it does not produce myelin sheath. If you see in this picture, this first picture shows you the unmyelinated fiber. One Schwann cell is encircling many axons, these yellow portions. And this is the myelinated one, in which one axon is enclosed by one Schwann cell. So this is the myelinated type of nerve fiber, and this is the unmyelinated, where you see many axons encircled by the one sheath, Schwann cell. Peripheral myelination or covering is produced by the Schwann cell. The central is produced, as I told you, by the oligodendrocytes. Then, how does a nerve travel, or how is the structure? It consists of a bundle of nerve fibers. Individual single axons don't travel, they travel as bundles. Outside the central or the fascicles in case of a larger nerve. Then they have a covering. One axon is covered by a tissue which is known as the endoneurium. Then they form bundles. These bundles are covered by the perineurium, and then many bundles collectively together form a nerve which is called the epineurium, and that is whole covered by the epineurium. If you see this picture, this is many axons, individual nerve fibers. These are covered by the endoneurium. Then they form a bundle. These each individual bundles you see in this picture, they are forming covered by the connective tissue which is called the perineurium, and then many bundles collectively together they're covered by another sheath which is called the epineurium. So this is basically the structure of the peripheral nerve. The nerve fiber, then you have endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium. And then blood vessels that nourish the nerve fibers, they travel, which are called the vasa nervorum in the connective tissue coverings. Nerves are fairly strong and resilient because nerve fibers are supported and protected by three connective tissue cords, that is endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium. If you see a structure, if you can see this, it says in three forms. These are the individual ones. Individual with the endoneurium, then they are in the form of small bundles, which is covered by the perineurium, and then this is the perineurium, and then outside the perineurium, the whole of the nerve, that is covered by the epineurium. Then the other tissue in the peripheral nervous system, other than the fibers, is the ganglia related with these nerves. These are aggregation of small nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system. Ganglia is always a collection of the nerve cell bodies. And the tracts or the fibers or the columns, the white matter, that is the nerve fibers. So one type of ganglia is your craniospinal ganglia, which is present in the dorsal part of the spinal nerve. I'll show you that is the root of the spinal nerves, cranial nerves. These are the sensory ganglia. And then there is another ganglia, which is the autonomic ganglia, which is motor in connection. It is related with the autonomic system. That is, some are sympathetic ganglia and some are parasympathetic ganglia according to the fibers or the connections. So you have two types of ganglia, the craniospinal dorsal root pair, which are sensory, and the autonomic ganglia, which are basically motor, and you have in that subdivided into the sympathetic ganglia and the parasympathetic ganglia. See this? This is a collection of the nerve cells covered by these connective tissue. This is the picture of the peripheral nervous system. This is the central portion, that is the spinal cord and the brain. And then you have the periphery, which are the nerves, the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. This is what we comprise of the peripheral nervous system. What are the different types of nerves? They can be afferent or sensory, impulses to the CNS, or efferent from the periphery, or efferent, which will be motor. They come from the CNS to the effectors, that is the muscles and the glands. And then some are only sensory, some are only motor, and some carry both types of fibers. Then the peripheral nervous system is anatomically and operationally continuous with the central nervous system. It has links. So it has the peripheral nervous system outside the cranial cavity, and the vertebral canal includes nerves which are either the cranial nerves, two types of nerves, and or the spinal nerves. The cranial nerve exit through the cranial cavity through the foramen in the cranium, and there are allowed 12 pairs of cranial nerves and arise from the there are 12 which come from the cranial cavity, and a part of it the accessory that comes, the spinal part of the accessory nerve comes from the superior part of the spinal cord. That is why we call it the spinal part of the accessory nerve. You see these 12 cranial nerves, which are one, sense of smell, sense of vision, eye, 3, 4, supplying the eye muscles, trigeminal sensory nerve of the face, abducent is the muscle which supplies to the eye muscle, which makes the eye look laterally. Facial nerve is the motor supply of the face. Quadricular is the hearing, and the equilibrium glossopharyngeal is with the tongue plus the pharynx. Vagus is the main parasympathetic nerve from the larynx to the abdomen, and accessory nerve is the muscles of the neck, and then hypoglossal is that of muscles of the tongue. So these are the 12 pairs of cranial nerves that we have. Then we have spinal nerves. Spinal nerves, they exit from the vertebral column through the intervertebral foramina, respective intervertebral foramina, and they arise in bilateral pairs from the specific segments. We give them the name as there are 31 pairs and identified by the letters and the numbers. T4 means third thoracic, fourth thoracic nerve. So that is T, L, S, and CO gives the origin of the nerve. So spinal nerves are attached to the spinal cord by 31 pairs, 8 cervical, vertebra are 7, but the nerves are 8, and then 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. Okay, so these are the spine. So we have cranial nerves and we have the spinal nerves. These are your peripheral nervous system, and the central was your spinal cord and the parts of the brain. Then we have the typical spinal nerve, how it is the form. It has, as you can see from the spinal cord, two roots are coming out, that is the dorsal root or the posterior root and the anterior root. The dorsal root contains large myelinated fibers and unmyelinated fibers. These are the ventral root, that is containing the large somatic fibers and myelinated fibers and the autonomic fibers. You see in this, these are the roots that you see, the posterior root and the anterior root, and then you have a dorsal root ganglion. This enlargement, if you see on the posterior aspect, that is the dorsal root ganglion. These are the structures which are there in relation with the spinal cord. During development, the spinal cord grows down till the lower end of the vertebral column, but as the vertebral column grows, the spinal cord becomes smaller, and so it is pulled upward, and it stays on till the adult life, till just for the first lumbar vertebra. To accommodate this disproportionate growth, the rootlets, they have to increase progressively, and as they have to come out from their individual intervertebral foramina, so they descend downwards. The nerve progressively descend downwards from above below, and then they reach their respective intervertebral foramina, and then they exit out of the vertebral canal. So the vertebra spinal cord finishes at first lumbar vertebra. So below first lumbar vertebra, all the nerves are going to go descend down. Supposing it is L4, that L4 nerve is going to descend down till the fourth intervertebral foramen, and then it is going to exit out from the spinal cord. So that is the basic structure. This collection from above downwards, these nerve fibers, that forms something, a structure which resembles that of a horse tail, and that is called the cauda equina. That is called the cauda equina. This horse tail structure are basically the collection of nerves which descend down till the level of their respective foramina. To accommodate this disproportionate growth and length, the root increases probably from up down. So upper cervical region roots are short and run, so they are horizontal. The roots of the lumbar and sacral level, as they have to reach their foramina. So their termination, they are resemble long and the horseshoe tail, and they are called the chordae equina. So collectively, they are going to be long, and they are going to reach their respective intervertebral foramina. And so this bunch of nerves together from the this lower portion, that is this part, that is going to the phylum terminal, is the Pyometer. Chordae equina is the horseshoe shaped tail. That is, these are the fibers. Upper cervical are just horizontally. These fibers exit out from the intervertebral foramina, whereas the lumbar and the sacral nerves, as the vertebra finishes at At1, so these nerves are going to travel down to their respective openings, and then they are going to come out from their foramina. So how is the root form, the spinal nerve form? Composition is that spinal nerve is connected to the spinal cord by two roots initially, the anterior and the posterior root. The anterior root is where it impulses from the central nervous system, that is, it is the motor one or the efferent one, and this go called the motor fibers, and they go to the skeletal muscle and in the anterior one of the spinal cord. Then is the posterior root, which is basically the afferent one. Fibers are converted with bringing sensation, pain, temperature, touch from the periphery, and they are called the sensory fibers, and these are going to relay on the posterior root ganglion. If you see in this picture, this is the anterior one, this is the posterior one, this is the posterior root, the ganglion. It's going to relay in that. So this is going to come from the ventral horn, this posterior fiber, efferent or afferent, or your sensory one, that is going to relay in this posterior horn. This is going to be from the posterior horn. The anterior horn is the motor, the ventral root is going to come out from this ventral horn. Okay. Then at each intervertebral foramina, the anterior and the posterior roots, they unite to form a spinal nerve. Here the motor and sensory fibers, they become mixed up. So on emerging from the foramina, the spinal nerve divides into anterior ramus and the posterior ramus. You see this? This is then, first is the root, first is the anterior horn and the posterior horn. They give out anterior and posterior roots. These then unite together to form the spinal nerve at the intervertebral foramina. Then they divide into anterior and posterior ramus. Okay. So the pattern is initially arises from the spinal root as rootlets, converge to form the nerve roots. They are small rootlets. If you see in this picture, these are small rootlets. They converge to form the root. This the posterior root and the anterior root. These together unite to form the spinal nerve, and that with the related with the posterior root, you have this sensory ganglion. Then they divide into the anterior ramus and the posterior ramus. So rootlets, root, then the spinal nerve, then the anterior and the posterior ramus. This is the basic formation. These are the horns. So first you have the anterior horn and the posterior horn. The anterior horn is motor, the posterior horn is sensory. Anterior horn gives out the efferent fibers, which are motor, and the posterior horn gives out the afferent, or you can say they receive, or the sensory ones, and then they are going to relay on this portion, that is your posterior or the sensory root ganglion. The anterior root consists of motor, passes from nerve cells, body's anterior horn to the effector organs. Posterior consists of sensory from the cell bodies from the periphery, ending and centrally to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord they're going to grow up into the central nervous system. The posterior and anterior roots unite at the intervertebral foramina, form a mixed both motor and sensory spinal nerve, which immediately divides into two rami, the posterior ramus and an anterior ramus. These motor mixed nerves, they are going to supply to the anterior and the posterior parts of the body. Nerves supplying the muscles of the trunk or the limb also contain about, it's not purely motor, they're 40% sensory fibers which convey pain and proprioceptive information. Cutaneous ones contains motor fibers which serve the sweat glands and the smooth muscles of the blood vessels and hair follicles. So we have both in the anterior and the posterior one, both which go to the trunk of the muscles, that also has sensory fibers, and that which is the cutaneous one also has the, basically cutaneous is sensory, but it also contains the motor fibers which are going to go to the sweat glands and the smooth muscles of the blood vessels and the hair follicles. So if you see in this picture, then this is going to divide into those which are going to give you the cutaneous branches, and then which is going to go into the motor branches. So this is going to go to the muscle. This is also going to contain the sensory fibers, and this one, which is the cutaneous one, which goes to the skin, that is also going to go and supply with the certain motor fibers as well. So the posterior ramus is going to supply to the muscles and the skin of the back, do not merge to form a major plexus. Anterior ramus is going to supply to the anterolateral body wall, that is the interior plus the lateral side muscles and the skin of the limbs. In addition to this, they also give certain meningeal branches that supply the meninges in the vertebra and coverings of the spinal cord. That is why it is called the meningeal branches. So posterior ramus is going to supply the muscles and skin of the back. Anterior is going to supply to the anterolateral, that is the interior plus the lateral body wall and the muscles of the skin. And then you have this meningeal branch which goes supplies to the meninges. And then you have thoracic spinal nerves, which also has rami communicants. These rami communicants at the thoracic level, these are going to go with the sympathetic part of the nervous system. So you have supply to the posterior, the anterolateral, then you have the meningeal branches and thoracic. These are basically the divisions of the spinal nerves. Then what are the functional components? What sort of fibers do you have in the spinal nerve? This is the visceral spinal nervous system, and then you have the somatic, as we said too. Visceral is going to be concerned with the organs. Somatic is with your skeletal muscles towards the periphery. In the somatic fibers, what type of fibers it contains is your general sensory fibers, which transmit sensations from the body to the central nervous system, which are exterior receptive, that is sensations from the skin, all sorts of sensations. Proprioceptive is your joint, muscle, tendon impulses. That is how do you know that whether the body, where the muscle position lies, where the joint is, how you are standing or not. This is going to give you, in addition to just the position, also by the hearing and the vision, they are going to work together and tell you what is the position of the body. That is proprioceptive, joint, muscle, tendon information. Then is the somatic muscle fibers. They transmit muscles. That is the, so somatic is going to be sensory with the exterior receptors and proprioceptors, and then you have the motor fibers going to go to the muscle. So these are basically the types of fibers, but it is going to be a mixed nerve, so you're going to have both types of fibers, sensory plus motor, and then exterior receptive. These are coming from the periphery, as the name is telling you, and proprioceptive is from the muscle, tendon, and joint. How do you know whether your joint is bent, it is straight, it is left or right, and with or without the help of your visual and hearing apparatus. Then you have these visceral fibers. They are concerned with the organs. Viscera, wherever there is visceral, it is concerned with the organs. That is, visceral reflex sensations. Afferent is bringing in sensations towards the center. That is the afferent fibers, and visceral motor is transmitting smooth involuntary muscle and glandular tissue. That is taking back the orders. Functional components of the spinal nerve is they are going to be general somatic and general visceral afferent. So both types of somatic and visceral, they are going to be afferent for those. Then they are going to be general somatic efferents and general visceral efferents. So they're going to be general and special. Functional components, you have general somatic is general afferent bringing in, and efferent which is going out. General, and same is the case with viscera. You have afferents and efferents, that is the general sensations which are concerned. Then you have these functional or special sensations. Then you have these special somatic coming from the body wall, specialized organs which are going to bring in the special afferent impulses, that is your sensory impulses from the retina and the cochlea. These would be called the somatic. And then you have the special. So these are the special organs. This is not the generalized muscle impulses. Then you have special visceral afferent fibers. That is again from the viscera. These are your organs, just on the way you have in the taste buds, that is considered as an organ. So impulses coming from that towards the brain, those would be called special, and they are visceral front because they are sensory. Then you have special somatic, going back to the body, that is to the muscles. These muscles would be special because they are performing the fine work, that is to the muscles of the tongue, that is the producing fine muscles, fine activity muscles of the eye are fine muscles, and then of the small muscles of the hand. These are all considered as specialized muscles. So that is why they are going to be by the specialized. Somatic is body wall and efferent is muscle fibers. Then you have special visceral, that is to the organs, and efferent going to that is which supplies the pharyngeal arch musculature, that is again the pharynx, that is the specialized portion. So you have specialized and generalized fibers. Generalized is to all, specialized is to the certain respective portion which perform specific functions. Then you have peripheral nerve plexus. So that was about how you have the ganglia, what type of ganglia do you have, what type of nerves which come from where, and what type of fibers do they contain. Then you have these peripheral nerve plexuses. Nerves are uh, composed of bundles of nerve fibers. They course, these nerves sometimes divide into branches that join the neighboring peripheral nerves, that is, they intermingle with each other. That forms a network of nerves and it is called a nerve plexus. This plexus allows that fibers from one nerve passes on to another, and most instances branching may not take place. A plexus thus permits a redistribution of nerve fibers within the different peripheral nerves. So there is exchange. The way we have anastomosis in the blood vessels, in this case, it is again the formation of the plexus, that is a nerve branches, gives branches to and the neighboring nerves. So that is, there is a mixture of supply. That means one nerve fiber is going to supply to two types of areas. So that is because there is plexus is formed, there is the mixture of fibers, that is a fiber goes to one nerve and also goes to the two nerves. So that forms a plexus. So it's just the other way. Like nerve plexuses are basically the anastomosis as we had it in the blood vessels. Plexuses are basically root of the limbs and anterior rami, and plexuses are basically formed by the ventral rami of the nerves, not the dorsal rami, to form the complicated nerve plexuses. You have how many types of plexuses? The cervical and the brachial, which are concerned with the upper limb, and lumbar and sacral plexuses, which are found at the root of the lower limb. See in this picture, the nerve plexus is made up of multitude of nerve branches, come from the spinal nerves, except for thoracic nerve 2 to 3, because this is your sympathetic nervous system. This does not give out your nerve plexus is not formed. They donate their anterior rami, not your dorsal rami. They form the nerve plexuses. So nerve plexuses, all this is going to form the nerve plexus anterior primary except T2 to T12, because that is at this level you have the formation of the sympathetic nervous system. For limbs you show enlargement, that is that part where the plexus is going to form large and more function is going to be performed. You see enlargement in the spinal cord, that is the enlargement in the spinal cord, that is at you see at the level of the limbs and upper and the lower limb, where you have increase of activity in the organs and the limbs. That is why more nerve has to be supplied, more muscle have to act. So you see the enlargement, and there the plexuses are formed. Nerve roots, anterior and posterior divisions. Anterior division flexor compartment को supply करता है, and the posterior division it supplies to the extensor compartment. The plexuses in these two areas are your cervical and brachial, lumbar and sacral plexuses. The peripheral plexus, as you can see, this area where you form the enlargements, you have the cervical plexus, you have the brachial plexus, lumbar, and the sacral plexus. So all these nerves. Damage to these plexuses is not going to recover, because if the stumps too, they are in line with each other, they start to regenerate, but they are blocked by the astrocytes. And astrocytes, if you remember, are the connective tissue aspect of or the neuroglial tissue of the CNS. So that is going to make the repair as just fibrotic. At the injury site, their axonal sprouts are soon retracted. So they are blocked by the astrocytes. As a result, permanent disability follows destruction of a tract in the CNS. So remember, nervous tissue never regenerates. It is completed or filled in gap by the connective tissue, and that connective tissue is your neuroglial tissue. Then what are dermatomes? Dermatomes is the unilateral area of the skin which is innervated by sensory fibers of the single spinal nerve. It is called a dermatome. So area of skin supplied by a single spinal nerve. that is called a dermatome. The dorsal root is the spinal nerve is distributed to a particular segment of the body. Each spinal except C1 sensory supply to specific regions of the skin. So that is area which it supplies by one spinal nerve. The sensory area which is supplied to of the skin, which is supplied by one spinal nerve, is called a dermatome. The seminal segment don't extend to face. Fifth cranial nerve supplies that. See this area of the skin that is supplied by the single spinal nerve. You can see this, all these individual nerves. Area of the skin that provides sensory input to the dorsal roots of the pairs of the spinal nerve. There are 8 cervical, or these nerves are there, and they are region of the body to which they are going to supply. Dermatomes are useful in neurology, finding the site of damage to the spine. By this help, if you know what dermatome is going to supply, this area you can follow up that, link 2 and 2 together, that what part of the spinal cord is damaged by going backwards. For clinical studies, many dermatome maps, as I've shown you in this picture, these are the dermatome maps which are there, and with this help of this, if there is anesthesia in a particular dermatome, you can localize that this dermatome over here is supposing L1 or L2, that the lesion is at the level of this L1 or L2 in the spinal cord. So otherwise the spinal cord, there is no other way to know what damage is at what level. So we have made up clinical studied posterior roots of spinal nerves. The dermatome maps have been devised to indicate typical pattern of innervation by the skin or specific nerves. Lesion of single posterior root or spinal nerve would rarely result in numbness over the area demarcated for that nerve in these maps, because purely if one spinal nerve is damaged, that area will not be numb, but it will have lesser of the sensations, because the areas are overlapped by areas from the other spinal nerve. From the other adjacent spinal nerves, they overlap. So that is why if an area, a spinal nerve is damaged, the area will not be all dead, because it is going to be compensated from the spinal nerve next to it. So there is adjacent spinal nerves overlap. So providing a type of a double coverage is there. So that is the benefit in the dermatome. At least 2 adjacent spinal nerves have to be interrupted to produce discernible area of numbness. To be visual acceptable that this area is really numb, both the nerves which are overlapping in that area, they have to be cut or they have to be damaged. Then only the area will really become numb. So basically, the dermatomes are the areas which are going to be supplied by one spinal nerve, and one spinal nerve, if it is damaged, this is not going to make the area numb, because that area is being overlapped by the other spinal nerve. So if both the spinal nerves are going to be damaged, then only that area will become numb. So if you see these are the different dermatomes anteriorly and posteriorly. Again, this is the area which, when you have the anterior and the posterior root, the interior ramus is going to go to the skin, and this spinal nerve is going to supply the skin. So that is why this area is going to be called the skin dermatome. And this portion which supplies the posterior, the area which is going to go to the muscle, is going to be called the myotome, which is this spinal nerve is supplying this area, these part of the muscles, that is called the myotome. Then you have segmental innervation of skin. The area of skin supplied by a single spinal nerve and therefore single segment is called a dermatome. They considerably overlap. The area, they said that touch is always greater in loss, that is the sensation of touch is impaired more as compared to temperature and pain sensation. So this, the degree of overlap of fibers carrying pain and thermal sensation is said to be more as compared to the touch sensation. So overlap of sensations of touch are less as compared to that of the pain and temperature. So whenever the nerve is involved, the pain and temperature is less in being affected, whereas touch is always greater in the area of being lost. Myotomes are, that was dermatome. Unilateral muscle mass receiving innervation from the fibers is conveyed by the singles known as myotome. I showed you this picture. This is a single spinal nerve which is supplying to this area of the skin is called a dermatome, and this which is supplying to the certain area of the musculoskeletal muscle is called the myotome. Okay. So muscles are supplied by 1 to 2 spinal nerves can be there. A part of the muscle can be supplied by a single spinal thread, or a group of muscles can be supplied by a so uh, one a part of the muscle can be supplied by a single spinal segment. Example, this supposing this muscle has C3 and C4, or a group of muscles can be supplied by a single segment. So it can just be a part of the muscle which is a myotome, or it can be a group of muscles. Okay, as in the muscles of the hand, they are supplied by T1 intrinsic muscles, that is the nerve supply coming from the ulnar nerve, that is T1. So that is a group of muscles, the intrinsic muscles of the hand, whereas this muscle is just one, a part of the muscle is getting its supply from C3 and C4. So damage results in maximum paralysis because there is no overlap. Segmental innervation of muscles. Most of these muscles are innervated by more than one spinal nerve, and therefore the same number of segments of the spinal cord. To paralyze a muscle completely, it is necessary that several spinal nerves have to be damaged, because there many number of spinal nerves supply one segment. So the way we had in the dermatome, more have to be damaged. In the same is the case to completely, many segments have to be involved. So myotomes and dermatomes. Myotomes, each muscle in the body is supplied by a particular level or segment of the spinal cord and its corresponding spinal nerve. Is this area of skin supplied by a specific nerve? So that is, myotome is the muscle supplied by the specific spinal nerve, and dermatome is the area of the skin. Then comes the autonomic nervous system. That was the other type. We said functionally. We said the autonomic nervous system or the visceral nervous system. What is autonomic nervous system? Autonomic nervous system is part of the central and peripheral nervous system, which is concerned with involuntary activity of the body, respiration, sweating, circulation, etc. So it is involuntary. That was voluntary in nature. It is a part of both the central and the peripheral because they are interrelated. The autonomic nervous system is a vegetative nervous system, and it is a division of peripheral, supplies the muscle and gland, influences the function of the internal organs. The autonomic control system acts largely unconsciously and regulates the body functions. Different parts. As primary control is that fight or flight, that means whether it's the stress, in case of the stress, the immediate response that comes is through this autonomic nervous system. That is, the response of the body is, in case of stress, is going to come from through this autonomic nervous system, and this mechanism is that fight or flight. That means either the body is going to react to it, or it is just going to stay away and it is going to shed away or run away from the damage. It controls the internal environment. The majority of the activities of the autonomic system do not reach our consciousness, that is, underlying, other than reaching to the higher levels. This is going to act. The control exerted by the autonomic is extremely rapid, that is, immediately you are unconscious, but there is a reflex that works. This is what we call as a reflex. They control the internal environment, and this is a reflex mechanism that is acting. Without the appreciative reflex is something that the sensitivity, the sensory fibers have brought in the information that this sensation is damaged, is affecting. Then it goes to the spinal cord. The spinal cord quickly, via its anterior root, is going to act, and that is, it's not going to go to the higher centers, that is to the brain. So that is at a sub level, subconscious level. So that is, you are not aware, but quickly the response is there. That is what the autonomic nervous system does. It is extremely rapid and widespread. Like the somatic nervous system has, it has an afferent fibers, that is the sensory, the connector, that is, it takes up the information, the area which is going to integrate the order, and then there are the effector neurons, that is, which is going to bring back that what is to be done. The autonomic system regulated by integrated reflexes through the brainstem, through the spinal cord and the organs. Hypothalamus is just above the brainstem. That means brain is going to act as the higher center, which is going to control the autonomic, regulatory, and the limbic system, that is the emotions which are going to be there. So it is all, hypothalamus controls your limbic system, and this is an interconnected pathway. The most autonomous functions are involuntary, and they can work in conjunction with the somatic nervous system, provides the voluntary control. So you can have autonomic plus your somatic nervous system, that is voluntary plus involuntary controls working together. The autonomic nervous system has three branches, three parts: sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric nervous system. Sympathetic system was often said that it is going to be worked as in stress, and it is considered as fight or flight. That means it's just to run away or just and a drastic action has to be taken place. Parasympathetic is always gradual for a long time. Fight or flight is a short-term response, and fight, rest and digest, or feed and breed is a long-time response that is done by the parasympathetic nervous system. Both these cases, they have opposite actions where one system activates a physiological response and the other inhibits it. So it is, the two are acting, one is excitatory and the other is inhibitory. Many exceptions were found. That is, it's not purely that one is going to be excitatory and the other is going to be inhibitory. They are a mixture of it. So that is not a sharp demarcation that one is excitatory and the other is inhibitory. A modern characterization is that sympathetic nervous system is a quick response mobilizing system, whereas parasympathetic is more slowly active damping. That means it's going to prolong the effect for a longer period of time, whereas sympathetic nervous system is quickly going to sympathize and show its response. So sympathetic is a quick response, whereas the parasympathetic system is a slow response, that is activated dampening system, gradual response, except in sexual arousal where both play a role, that is collective. So basically you can say sympathetic nervous system is a quick response, whereas the parasympathetic is more slow activated response and for a longer period of time. Now, if you compare the two, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic emerges from the spinal cord in the thoracic and the lumbar area. So that is why we call it till L2 and L3, we call it the thoracolumbar outflow. Whereas parasympathetic outflow begins from cranial nerves, craniosacral. That is, certain cranial nerves give you parasympathetic fibers. That is oculomotor nerve, facial nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, and vagus nerve, and the sacral is S2 to S4. Only parasympathetic pathway is this. That means all the activity from these areas is going to give you parasympathetic activity, and from thoracolumbar, that is T2 to T12, and lumbar L2 to 3, this is going to give you, they have certain ganglia which are going to give you the sympathetic activity. Those are called the intermediate ganglia in the spinal cord. You do not have normally intermediate ganglia, you just have a ventral root and the dorsal anterior root and the posterior root, whereas an intermediate root or the anterior ganglia which is present, that or the horn, intermediate horn is present in the area where you have the sympathetic outlet, and that sympathetic outlet is going to be in the thoracic and the lumbar region till L2 and 3. So you have a third in horn, that is, you have normally you have ventral and dorsal horns, but where you have the sympathetic region in the spinal cord, you're going to have an intermediate horn as well, showing you that area is the sympathetic area. Then you have two neuron efferent pathways. The preganglionic fibers must first synapse onto the postganglionic neuron fibers coming from the preganglionic. That is, you have two ganglia. First ganglia is, if supposing it is your spinal cord, that is going to be from the spinal cord. You have the preganglionic. Those fibers are going to go to the ganglia which is in the periphery. Those are called your sympathetic ganglia. They are going to go and relay there or either pass through. So that is why they are called the preganglionic, and then they are going to stay there. Then from these ganglia they're going to start another pathway that is going to be called the postganglionic. So that is why something before that ganglia and something after that, that is given the name as preganglionic or postganglionic. The preganglionic or the first neuron will begin at the outflow and will synapse at the postganglionic or the 7 neuron cell body. That is where you have the sympathetic ganglia. I'll show you the picture. The postganglion will then synapse at the target organ. So starting from the spinal cord, supposing we're talking about the sympathetic, you have sympathetic ganglia lying on either sides of the vertebral column. From the thoracolumbar outflow, that is going to be your preganglionic fibers. Those preganglionic fibers are going to travel out from the spinal cord. They're going to go to the sympathetic ganglia. That is the sympathetic trunk or chain of ganglia which lie on either sides of the vertebral column. So this is going to be from the origin, that is from the outflow, then to the ganglia, that is the sympathetic trunk. From there The postganglionic fibers, another chain of fibers is going to start. That is going to be called the postganglionic fibers. They are going to start from that chain of ganglia, and then they're going to go to the target organ. So you have two steps, two neuron efferent pathways. Same is the case in the postganglion, in the parasympathetic system. The afferent impulses from the viscera via the afferent pathways to the central nervous system, integrated through the connector neurons, leave via efferent pathways to the visceral effectors. That is, afferent and efferent, you have the same, and made up of these preganglionic and postganglionic fibers. In detail, you will talk when you do the brain. Organization of autonomic nervous system distributed through central and peripheral nervous system. The two parts basis of anatomy differences in neurotransmitters and differences in physiological effects. That is, the two sympathetic and parasympathetic have autonomic difference, that is the structure. They have differences in the substances which are released at nerve endings, and then in the effects. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic, they produce opposite effect, but still they maintain an internal, though having opposite activity, they maintain a stable internal environment. Sympathetic part, larger of the two parts of the autonomic, is widely distributed. It innervates all the organs of the body. The function of sympathetic activity is to prepare the body for an emergency. A redistribution of blood, it leaves the skin, brain, heart, dilates the pupils, inhibits smooth muscles of the bronchi, hair stand on, sweating occurs. All this is it body prepares the body for activity or emergency. Sympathetic division is the consists of nerves. They are the lateral gray column from T1 to L2 and 3. They are general, visceral, and efferent. Then they go on to the paravertebral ganglia, which have several sympathetic ganglia, paravertebral on either sides of the vertebral column. Then you have cervical ganglia, which are thoracic ganglia, lumbar ganglia, and sacral ganglia. Then you have prevertebral ganglia, certain another type of ganglia, which I'll call your preganglia. They are these named as at the level of the celiac ganglia and aortic-renal near the kidney, with the blood vessels that is which supply the intestines. Then you have the chromophore cells. That is, these are the areas where you have the collection of neurons in three places which are going to have the same activity or the same chemical transmitter which is going to be released by the nerve endings. One is paravertebral on either sides. Then you have prevertebral, and then you have these chromophore cells in the adrenal medulla. They also produce adrenaline and produce the same activity as the sympathetic nervous system. Then is these afferent nerve fibers. You understand these white and gray rami communicants when you do it in detail. If you see this, this is the sympathetic ganglia which is lying on either sides. That is nerve fibers which are rising from the anterior or the posterior, that is going to enter into this nerve ganglion, the sympathetic ganglion, via these white or the gray rami communicants. These impulses, they're going to enter through this white rami communicants, and then they're going to leave from the postganglionic as a gray rami communicants, and then they're going to enter into the spinal nerve. So this is bringing in afferent neuron, that is bringing in the sensory, going to the spinal cord, then the efferent via this red tract. This is going to go pass through the white ramus communicants, relay in the sympathetic ganglion, then postganglionic, they are going to pass through this and enter into the spinal cord as the target organs. Then you have this, these ganglia provide postganglionic neurons from which the innervation of the target organs follows. These are called your splanchnic nerves. That is, the postganglionic fibers are called your splanchnic nerves. At different levels, you have uh, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, and visceral afferent neurons. That is, these are the different splanchnic nerves through which your efferent fibers are going to be supplied. Then you have the efferent sympathetic outflow is lateral gray horns of the spinal cord from T1 to L2. The pass leave the cord in the anterior nerve, pass via to the white, as I told you, paravertebral ganglia that is there, the sympathetic trunk. Then from this, the postganglionic fibers arise, non-myelinated leave the ganglia to the thoracic spinal nerves through the gray rami communicants and enter into these spinal nerves. You see in this, they're going to come pass through this white ramus, through the ramus, through this sympathetic ganglia, through the sympathetic ganglia. You have the postganglionic. This postganglionic enters into the spinal nerve, and then it is going to go into the target organs. Then you have, so this was the general outline. Then you have the sympathetic trunks. These are the gangliated trunks that I showed you on either side. This is in the neck, preganglia, thoracic level, you have lumbar level, or so the preganglionic from the outflow is going to go into these sympathetic ganglia. Below the two trunks end by joining together to form a single ganglion that is called the ganglion impar. If you see in this picture, this is the level where you are having the sympathetic outflow. This sympathetic outflow is going to go into this chain of ganglia, sympathetic ganglia. From this sympathetic, this is preganglionic, then postganglionic. Postganglionic go into the organs. This is the red is your sympathetic outflow, and the blue is your parasympathetic outflow. Then is the parasympathetic division. Parasympathetic has nerves, the outflow comes from cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, 10, and the sacral spinal nerves. These then go onto the fibers pass through this. They go on to the fibers go to the ganglia. These ganglia, which are basically present in the or near to the organs where they're going to be supplied, they do not pass into the sympathetic trunk. They pass their ganglia, the parasympathetic ganglia. The preganglionic fibers are so longer, they are going to travel to the ganglia, which are going to lie next to the organ to be supplied, or in the walls of the organ to be supplied. From there, they are going to give rise to the postganglionic fibers. Right? So this is the outflow of the parasympathetic. So cranial outflow, pre-peripheral located close to the viscera, the innervate. You have the parasympathetic ganglia in the head and neck, which are you going to concern is ciliary, pterygopalatine, submandibular, and otic. And then from these locations have nerve plexuses. Then they are going to go through the postganglionic non-myelinated, and they are short in length because the postganglionic are short in length because they just lie next to it or near the wall of the organ to be placed. So from there, they are going to form these arc systems. So again, if you see this, blue is all your parasympathetic nervous system and red is all your sympathetic nervous system. So innervation is going to be, the sympathetic is via sensory, parasympathetic is via the vagus nerve. Then you have the autonomic ganglia. Sympathetic form a part of the sympathetic trunk. Parasympathetic ganglia situated in the walls of the viscera. Their large autonomic plexus are going to be formed, and then you have the function. Sympathetic is quick response, parasympathetic is a long time response. The ratio of preganglionic to postganglionic fibers, sympathetic fibers is about 1:10, by more postganglionic fibers, whereas in preganglionic parasympathetic is less, 1 or less because restricted than the sympathetic. Antagonistic control functions, maintains homeostasis and maintains the internal stability. And then you have this function difference, that is the different organs which are their different functions is going to be produced by the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Then you have this enteric nervous system. Enteric nervous system is basically present in the walls of the intestines or in the organs, and they are going to, in a mini brain, they are going to control by their own chemical and mechanical changes in the gut. They produce the changes and they produce the contraction. Then a brief comparison between sympathetic and parasympathetic is, the sympathetic prepares the body for emergency, parasympathetic conserves and restores the energy. Outflow is thoracolumbar in case of sympathetic. In the cranial nerves, it is 3rd, 7th, 9th, and 10th nerves, and S2 and S4. Preganglionic fibers both are myelinated. Ganglia plexus, paravertebral, you have sympathetic trunk. In the parasympathetic, your ganglia are located in the wall of the organ or next to it. Neurotransmitter in the sympathetic is acetylcholine, same is the case with that. Postganglionic fibers are long and non-myelinated because your ganglia are further away from the organ to be supplied. They are short in case of myelinated. Parasympathetic because your ganglia are just near to the wall of the organ to be supplied. Characteristic activity is widespread. This is few postganglionic fibers. Neurotransmitter is norepinephrine in the sympathetic, where it is acetylcholine all over in parasympathetic. Higher control is hypothalamus, same is the case in that. So this is a comparative study. This is also the same, a comparative study between the two. And this shows you the picture again, what are the fibers coming from what part and supplying to the, this is sympathetic chain, and the parasympathetic is the target organs is the next to the body that is to be supplied. Higher control is hypothalamus, Basically, what function it does is the autonomic is preserving the body homeostasis by controlling all this. Anterior hypothalamus influences the parasympathetic, whereas the posterior part of it gives rise to the sympathetic response. So basically, it is maintaining the control or homeostasis of the body, and the higher control of the autonomic nervous system is your autonomic nervous system. So that finishes the brief outline of the nervous tissue, what are the different, the introductory lecture about the nervous tissue, and this all is going to be included in the test, which is day after tomorrow. And I hope you will be able to recollect. It's just a brief outline of what all the nervous system is, because though in detail we will study when we do the neurology, that is brain is done, and we'll talk more about the fibers, afferent, efferents, white collection. It's just to give you an idea what is autonomic and what is parasympathetic and sympathetic, and the different parts of the brain. I hope you have been able to gather something which is there. Okay then. Thank you, and see you tomorrow with embryology.